Dianetics, Book 2, Chapter 2, Part 2, The Reactive Mind. Thus, we could go down the catalogue of mental ills, and by concocting positive suggestions, to create the state of mind, we could bring about, in the awakened subject, a semblance to every insanity, understood that these are semblances. They are similar to insanity, in that the subject would act like an insane person. He would not be an insane person the moment the suggestion is relieved, the subject being informed that it was a suggestion. The aberration, and all these insanities, etc., are grouped under the heading of aberration, theoretically vanishes. The duplication of aberrations of all classes and kinds, in subjects who have been hypnotized or drugged, has demonstrated that there is some portion of the mind which is not in contact with the consciousness, but which contains data. It was the search for this portion of the mind which led to the resolution of the problem of insanity, psychosomatic ills, and other aberrations. It was not approached through hypnotism, and hypnotism is just another tool, a tool which is of no use in the practice of Dianetics, and is, indeed, not needed at all. Here, we have an individual who is acting sanely, who is given a positive suggestion, and who then, temporarily, acts insanely. His sanity is restored by the release of the suggestion into his consciousness, at which moment it loses its force upon him. But this is only a semblance of the mechanism involved. The actual insanity, one not laid now by some hypnotist, does not need to emerge into the consciousness to be released. There is this difference, and others, between hypnotism and the actual source of aberration. But hypnotism is a demonstration of its working parts. Review the first example of the positive suggestion. The subject was unconscious, which is to say, he was not in possession of complete awareness or self-determinism. He was given something he must do, and the something was hidden from his consciousness. The operator gave him a signal. When the signal occurred, the subject performed an act. The subject gave reasons for the act, which were not the real reasons for it. The subject found fault with the operator and the operator's clothing, but did not see that it was the tie which signaled the action. The suggestion was released, and the subject no longer felt a compulsion to perform the act. These are the parts of aberration. Once one knows exactly what parts of what are aberrations, the whole problem is very simple. It seems incredible at first glance that the source could have remained so thoroughly hidden for so many thousands of years of research, but at second glance, it becomes a wonder that the source was ever discovered, for it is hidden cunningly, and well. Unconsciousness of the non-hypnotic variety is a little more rugged. It takes more than a few passes of the hand to cause unconsciousness of the insanity-producing variety. The shock of accidents, the anesthetics used for operations, the pain of injuries, and the deliriums of illness are the principal sources of what we call unconsciousness. The mechanism, in our analogue of the mind, is very simple. In comes a destructive wave of physical pain, or a pervading poison, such as ether, and out go some or all of the fuses of the analytical mind. When it goes out, so go what we know as the standard memory banks. The periods of unconsciousness are blanks in the standard memory banks. These missing periods make up what Dianetics calls the reactive mind bank. The times when the analytical mind is in full operation, plus the times when the reactive mind is in operation, are a continuous line of consecutive recording for the entire period of life. During the periods when the analytical mind is cut out of circuit, in full or in part, the reactive mind cuts in full or in part. In other words, if the analytical mind is unfused, so that it is half out of circuit, the reactive mind is half in circuit. No such sharp percentages are actually possible, but this is to give an approximation. When the individual is unconscious, in full or in part, the reactive mind is cut in full or in part. When he is fully conscious, His analytical mind is fully in command of the organism. When his consciousness is reduced, the reactive mind is cut into the circuit. Just that much. The moments, which contain unconsciousness in the individual, are contra-survival moments, by and large. Therefore, it is vital that something take over, so that the individual can go through motions, to save the whole organism. The fighter, who fights half out on his feet. The burned man, who drags himself out of the fire. These are cases when the reactive mind is valuable. The reactive mind is very rugged. It would have to be in order to stand up to the pain waves, which knock out other sentience in the body. It is not very refined, but it is most awesomely accurate. It possesses a low order of computing ability, an order which is sub-moron. But one would expect a low order of ability from a mind which stays in circuit when the body is being crushed or fried. The reactive bank does not store memories as we think of them. It stores engrams. These engrams are a complete recording, down to the last accurate detail, of every perception present in a moment, of partial or full unconsciousness. They are just as accurate as any other recording in the body, but they have their own force. They are like phonograph records, or motion pictures. If these contained all perceptions of sight, sound, smell, taste, organic sensation, etc., the difference between an engram and a memory, however, is quite distinct. An engram can be permanently fused into any and all body circuits, and behaves like an entity. In all laboratory tests on these engrams, they were found to possess inexhaustible sources of power to command the body. No matter how many times one was reactivated in an individual, it was still powerful. Indeed, it became even more able to exert its power in proportion to its reactivation. The only thing which could even begin to shake these engrams was the technique which developed into Dianetic therapy, which will be covered in full in the third section of this volume. This is an example of an engram. A woman is knocked down by a blow. She is rendered unconscious. She is kicked and told she is a faker, that she is no good, that she is always changing her mind. A chair is overturned in the process. A faucet is running in the kitchen. A car is passing in the street outside. The engram contains a running record of all these perceptions: sight, sound, tactile, taste, smell, organic sensation, kinetic sense, joint position, thirst record, etc. The engram would consist of the whole statement made to her when she was unconscious, the voice tones and emotion in the voice, the sound and feel of the original and later blows, the tactile of the floor, the feel and sound of the chair overturning, the organic sensation of the blow, perhaps the taste of blood in her mouth, or any other taste present there, the smell of the person attacking her, and the smells in the room, the sound of the passing car's motor and tires, etc. These would all be considered something on the order of a positive suggestion. But there is something else here, which is new, something which is not in the standard banks, except by context, pain, and painful emotion. These things are what make the difference between the standard banks and the reactive engram banks. Physical pain and painful emotion. Physical pain and painful emotion are the difference between an engram, which is the cause of aberration, all aberration, and a memory. We all have heard that bad experience is helpful to living, and that without bad experience, man never learns. This may be very, very true, but it doesn't embrace the engram. That isn't experience, that is commanded action. Perhaps before man had a large vocabulary, these engrams were of some use to him. They were survival in ways which will be developed later. But when man acquired a fine, homonymic, words that sound the same, but mean different things, language, and, indeed, when he acquired any language, these engrams were much more a liability than a help. And now, with man well evolved, these engrams do not protect him at all, but make him mad, inefficient, and ill. The proof of any assertion lies in its applicability. When these engrams are deleted from the reactive mind bank, rationality and efficiency are enormously heightened, health is greatly increased, and the individual computes rationally on the survival conduct pattern, which is to say, he enjoys himself and the society of those around him, and is constructive and creative. He is destructive only when something actually threatens the sphere of his dynamics. These engrams, then, are entirely negative in value. In this stage of man's development, when he was nearer the level of his animal cousins, who have, all of them, reactive minds of this same kind, he might have had use for the data, but language, and his changed existence, make any engram a distinct liability, and no engram has any constructive value. The reactive mind was provided to secure survival. It still pretends to act in that fashion, but its wild errors now led only in the other direction. There are actually three kinds of engrams, all of them aberrative. First is the contra-survival engram. This contains physical pain, painful emotion, all other perceptions, and menace to the organism. A child, knocked out by a rapist and abused, receives this type of engram. The contra-survival engram contains apparent or actual antagonism to the organism. The second engram type is the pro-survival engram. A child who has been abused is ill. He is told, while he is partially or wholly unconscious, that he will be taken care of, that he is dearly loved, etc. This engram is not taken as contra-survival, but pro-survival. It seems to be in favor of survival. Of the two, this last is the most aberrative, since it is reinforced by the law of affinity, which is always more powerful than fear. Hypnotism preys on this characteristic of the reactive mind, being a sympathetic address to an artificially unconscious subject. Hypnotism is as limited as it is, because it does not contain, as a factor, physical pain and painful emotion, things which keep an engram out of sight, and moored below the level of consciousness. The third is the painful emotion engram, which is similar to the other engrams. It is caused by the shock of sudden loss, such as the death of a loved one. The reactive mind bank is composed exclusively of these engrams. The reactive mind thinks exclusively with these engrams, and it thinks with them in a way which would make Kazhibsky swear, for it thinks in terms of full identification, which is to say, identities, one thing identical to another. If the analytical mind did a computation on apples and worms, it could be stated, probably, as follows: some apples have worms in them, others don't. When biting an apple, one occasionally finds a worm, unless the apple has been sprayed properly. Worms in apples leave holes. The reactive mind, however, doing a computation on apples and worms, as contained in its engram bank, would calculate as follows: apples are worms, bites are holes in apples, are holes in anything, are apples, and always are worms, are apples, bites, etc. The analytical mind's computations might embrace the most staggering summations of calculus, the shifty turns of symbolic logic, the computations requisite to bridge building or dressmaking. Any mathematical equation ever seen came from the analytical mind, and might be used by the analytical mind in resolving the most routine problems, but not the reactive mind. That's so beautifully, wonderfully simple, that it can be stated, in operation, to have just one equation: A equals A equals A equals A equals A. Start any computation with the reactive mind. Start it with the data it contains. Of course, any datum is just the same to it as any other datum in the same experience. An analytical computation done on the woman being kicked, as mentioned, would be that women get themselves into situations sometimes when they get kicked and hurt, and men have been known to kick and hurt women. A reactive mind computation about this engram, as an engram, would be the pain of the kick equals the pain of the blow equals the overturning chair equals the passing car equals the faucet, equals the fact that she is a faker, equals the fact that she is no good, equals the fact that she changes her mind, equals the voice tones of the man, equals the emotion, equals a faker, equals a faucet running, equals the pain of the kick, equals organic sensation in the area of the kick, equals the overturning chair, equals changing one's mind, equals, but why continue, every single perception in this engram, equals every other perception in this engram. What? That's crazy. Precisely. Let us further examine our post-hypnotic positive suggestion of the touched tie and the removed coat. In this, we have the visible factors of how the reactive mind operates. This post-hypnotic suggestion needs only an emotional charge and physical pain to make it a dangerous engram. Actually, it is an engram of a sort. It is laid in by sympathy between the operator and subject, which would make it a sympathy engram. Pro-survival. Now, we know that the operator had only to touch his tie to make the awakened subject remove his coat. The subject did not know what it was which caused him to remove his coat, and found all manner of explanation for the action, none of which was the right one. The engram, the post-hypnotic suggestion in this case, was actually placed in the reactive mind bank. It was below the level of consciousness. It was compulsion, springing from below the level of consciousness, and it worked upon the muscles to make the subject remove his coat. It was data, fused into the circuits of the body, below the command level of the analytical mind, and operated not only upon the body, but also upon the analytical mind itself. If this subject took off his coat every time he saw somebody touch a necktie, society would account him slightly mad. And yet, there was no power of consent about this. If he had attempted to thwart the operator by refusing to remove the coat, the subject would have experienced great discomfort of one sort or another. Let us now take an example of the reactive mind's processes. In a lower echelon of life, a fish swims into the shallows, where the water is brackish, yellow, and tastes of iron. He has just taken a mouthful of shrimp, when a bigger fish rushes at him and knocks against his tail. The small fish manages to get away, but he has been physically hurt. Having negligible analytical powers, the small fish depends upon reaction for much of his choice of activity. Now, he heels his tail and goes on about his affairs. But, one day he is attacked by a larger fish, and gets his tail bumped. This time he is not seriously hurt, merely bumped, but something has happened. Something within him considers that in his choice of action, he is now being careless. Here is a second injury in the same area. The computation on the fish reactive level was shallows equals brackish equals yellow equals iron taste equals pain in tail equals shrimp in mouth, and any one of these equals any other. The bump in the tail on the second occasion, keyed in the engram, it demonstrated to the organism that something like the first accident, identity thought, could happen again. Therefore, beware. The small fish, after this, swims into brackish water. This makes him slightly nervous. But he goes on swimming, and finds himself in yellow and brackish water, and still, he does not turn back. He begins to get a small pain in his tail. But he keeps on swimming. Suddenly, he gets a taste of iron, and the pain in his tail turns on heavily, and away he goes like a flash. No fish was after him. There were shrimp to be had there. But away he went anyway. Dangerous place. And if he had not turned away, he would have really gotten himself a pain in the tail. The mechanism is survival activity of a sort. In a fish, it may serve a purpose. But in a man who takes off a coat every time somebody touches a tie, the survival mechanism has long outlived its time. But it is there. Let us further investigate our young man and the coat. The signal for the coat removal was very precise. The operator touched his tie. This is equivalent to any or all of the perceptions the fish received, and which made the fish turn back. The touch of the tie could have been a dozen things. Any one of the dozen might have signaled the removal of the coat. In the case of the woman who was knocked out and kicked, any perception in the engram she received has some quality of restimulation. Running water from a faucet might not have affected her greatly, but water running from a faucet plus a passing car might have begun some slight reactivation of the engram, a vague discomfort in the areas where she was struck and kicked, not enough yet to cause her real pain, but they're all the same. To the running water and the passing car, we add the sharp falling of a chair, and she experiences a shock of mild proportion. Add now the smell and voice of the man who kicked her, and the pain begins to grow. The mechanism is telling her that she is in dangerous quarters, that she should leave, but she is not a fish. She is a highly sentient being. To our knowledge, the most complex mental structure so far evolved on Earth, organism of the species, man. There are many other factors in the problem than this one engram. She stays. The pains in the areas where she was abused become a predisposition to illness, or a chronic illness in themselves. Minor it is true in the case of this one incident, but illness just the same. Her affinity with the man who beat her may be so high that the analytical level, being assisted by a normally high general tone, may counter against these pains. But if that level is low, without much to assist it, then the pains can become major. The fish that was so struck and received an engram did not disavow shrimp. Shrimp might have made him a little less enthusiastic afterwards, but the survival potential of shrimp eating made shrimp equal far more pleasure than it did pain. A pleasant and hopeful life in general, and never think we intimate that the woman stays for food alone. Whatever the wits say about women, has a high survival potential, and that can overcome a very great deal of pain as the survival potential diminishes. However, the level of pain, zone 0 and zone 1, is more closely approached, and such an engram could begin to be reactivated severely. There is another factor here, however, besides pain. In fact, several more factors. If the young man with the detachable coat had been given one of the neurotic positive suggestions, as listed a few pages back, he would have reacted to it on signal. The engram this woman has received contains a neurotic positive suggestion, quite in addition to the general restimulators, such as the faucet, and the car, and the overturning chair. She has been told that she is a faker, that she is no good, and that she is always changing her mind when the engram is restimulated. In one of the great many ways possible, she has a feeling that she is no good, a faker, and she will change her mind. There are several cases to hand which peculiarly illustrate the sadness of this. One case in particular, which was cleared, had been beaten severely many times, and told a similar thing each time, all derogatory. The content inferred that she was very loose morally, and would cohabit with anyone. She was brought in as a case by her father. She had since been divorced, who complained that she was very loose morally, and had cohabited with several men. In as many weeks, she herself admitted that she was. She could not see how it could be, and it worried her, but she just could not seem to help it. Examination of the engrams in her reactive mind bank brought forth a long series of beatings with this content, because this was a matter of research, not treatment. Although that was given, her former husband was contacted. An examination, independent of her knowledge, demonstrated his rage dramatization to contain these very words. He had beaten his wife into being a morally loose woman, because he was afraid of morally loose women. All cases examined in all this research were checked. The patient's engrams against the engrams in the donor. The contents of the incidents were verified wherever possible, and were found uniformly to agree. Every safeguard was made to prevent any other method of communication between donor and patient. Everything found in the unconscious periods of every patient, when checked against other sources, was found to be exact. The analogy between hypnotism and aberration bears out well. Hypnotism plants, by positive suggestion, one or another form of insanity. It is usually a temporary planting, but sometimes, the hypnotic suggestion will not lift or remove, in a way desirable to the hypnotist, the danger of running experiments with hypnosis on uncleared patients is found in another mechanism of the reactive mind. When an engram, such as our example above exists, the woman obviously was unconscious. At the time she received the engram, she had no standard bank memory record of the incident, beyond the knowledge that she had been knocked out by the man. The engram was not, then, an experience as we understand the word. It could work from below, to aberrate her thinking processes. It could give her strange pains, which she attributed to something else, in the areas injured, but it was not known to her. The key-in was necessary to activate the engram, but what precisely could key it in? At some later time, when she was tired, the man threatened to strike her again, and called her names. This was conscious-level experience. It was found to be mentally painful by her, and it was mentally painful only because there was real, live, physical pain unseen under it, which had been keyed in by the conscious experience. The second experience was a lock. It was a memory, but it had a new kind of action. In the standard banks, it had too much power, and it gained that power from a past physical blow. The reactive mind is not too careful about its time clock. It can't tell 1 year old from 90. In fact, when a key-in begins, the actual engram moved up under the standard bank. She thinks she is worried about what he said in the jock experience. She is actually worried about the engram. In this way, memories become painful, but pain doesn't store in the standard banks. There is no place in that bank for pain. None. There is a place for the concept of pain. And these concepts of what is painful are good enough to keep the sentient organism called man away from all the pain he believes is actually dangerous. In a clear, there are no pain-inducing memories, because there is no physical pain record left to ruin the machinery. From the reactive mind bank, the young man with the detachable coat did not know what was worrying him, or what made him do what he did. The person with an engram does not know what is worrying him. He thinks it is the lock, and the lock may be a very long way removed from anything resembling the engram. The lock may have similar perceptic content, but it may be on another subject entirely. It is not very complicated to understand what these engrams do. They are simply moments of physical pain, strong enough to throw part or all the analytical machinery out of circuit. They are antagonism to the survival of the organism, or pretended sympathy to the organism's survival. That is the entire definition. Great or little, unconsciousness, physical pain, perceptic content, and contra-survival, or pro-survival data. They are handled by the reactive mind, which thinks exclusively in identities of everything equals everything, and they enforce their commands upon the organism by wielding the whip of physical pain. If the organism does not do exactly as they say, and believe any clear, that's impossible. The physical pain turns on. They steer a person, like a keeper steers a tiger, and they can make a tiger out of a man in the process, without much trouble, and give him mange into the bargain. If man had not invented language, or, as will be demonstrated, if his languages were a little less homonymic, and more specific with the personal pronouns, engrams would still be survival data, and the mechanism would work. But man has outgrown the use. He chose between language and potential madness, and for the vast benefits of the former, he received the curse of the latter. The engram is the single and sole source of aberration and psychosomatic illness. An enormous quantity of data has been sifted. Not one single exception has been found. In normal people, in the neurotic and insane, the removal of these engrams, wholly or in part, without other therapy, has uniformly brought about a state greatly superior to the current norm. No need was found for any theory or therapy other than those given in this book, for the treatment of all psychic or psychosomatic ills. Notes: an injunction here, these are tests. They have been made on people who could be hypnotized, and people who could not be, but who were drugged. They brought forth valuable data for Dianetics. They can be duplicated only when you know Dianetics, unless you want to actually drive somebody insane by accident. For these suggestions do not always vanish. Hypnotism is a wild variable. It is dangerous, and belongs in the parlor, in the same way you would want an atom bomb there. The word engram in Dianetics is used in its severely accurate sense, as a definite and permanent trace left by a stimulus on the protoplasm of a tissue. It is considered as a unit group of stimuli, impinged solely on the cellular being. In Dianetics, a memory is considered to be any concept of perceptions stored in the standard memory banks, which is potentially recallable by the eye, a scene beheld by the eyes and perceived by the other senses, becomes a record in the standard memory banks, and later may be recalled by eye for reference.